Hey, it's Minute Book Reports, and I just want to make a quick reading update video on A Midsummer Night's Dream. I just finished reading the book, and I want to share some of my thoughts and hopefully encourage people to not be afraid of reading Shakespeare. My overall reading time for A Midsummer Night's Dream was about 2 hours, which I did in one sitting, which was really nice. There was only one part to this reading update video, but I was a little worried before actually reading this story, and I was worried because I thought, well, maybe I wouldn't understand it. It's been so long since I read Shakespeare, and in fact, I had to read this story, I think it was my freshman year in high school, so it's been a long time. And back then, we actually had to memorize. I think the teacher gave us like some assignments to have to memorize either like 1 or 2 like big chunks of I think Puck's, one of his speeches. And so it was a lot of work back then. But now I'm just reading it for fun, and so I was worried. But as I got into the text and I noticed that, well, it was just basically a play that people were just talking. The language wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I was more concerned about remembering the characters, because the characters had a lot of, in my opinion, had a lot of similar names. I mean, I know now that I've read the story, it doesn't seem so difficult, but when you're opening the play and you're looking at the list of character names, they're so unfamiliar. You know, they have Hippolyta, there's Hermia, and Helena. Those 3 sort of tripped me up in the beginning, but I had to realize, okay, who is who, and eventually you don't really see Hippolyta too much, and then Hermia you see is pairing off with Lysander, and then there's Helena, who is trying to be with Demetrius. So for those people that are intimidated by Shakespeare, I would just encourage them that Shakespeare is somewhat intimidating. You know, it looks difficult on the outside, but I think if you just stick with it and you just say, okay, I'm just gonna be committed to reading as best as I can. I might not understand all of the language, but because it's all dialogue based, I think that over time you'll kind of understand what the story is about. You know, it's very similar to like watching a foreign film. If you ever watch a foreign film and let's say there were no translations, you would probably miss a lot of maybe the more subtle parts of the story, but you would at least understand the overall story arc. It's like watching television if you put mute on. I think you'd be able to understand what the story is about, but you would still miss, I guess, a lot of that richness in the story. But with Shakespeare, if you're just so overwhelmed by the language, the poetry, that it's so off-putting and that you don't even want to know what the story is about, that I would just encourage you to just try and get in there, give yourself some time. It's going to require some patience, but eventually you'll pick it up. You'll understand what's going on in the story, and it's really not that bad. As I was reading this, I really tried to think of Shakespeare as a television show, something that I would enjoy, but that most of the time when we are exposed to television or movies, we see it in the visual form. So the director has inserted the cinematography with the action of the actors and actresses, as well as the use of lighting, sound, music, things like that. But in this story, you're just given basically the script, and this is what a script would look like. You know, this is what it would look like. It would just be people talking, maybe some direction, you know, exit, enter, but it's very bare bones. When I was in college, we had to write a script, which was intimidating because it looked boring. It basically looked like all dialogue, and if you've ever written just dialogue, it's hard. It seems easy because you don't have to write all the narrative prose, you don't have to write the descriptions, you don't have to write the setting, but it makes it difficult in storytelling because you're relying so much on the reader to sort of fill in all the gaps, and then you're just providing the dialogue. There are some times when I read fiction where I just read dialogue. That's probably not the best way to read fiction, but most of the time, if I just read the dialogue between the main characters or any of the characters, then I'm able to understand what's going on in the story. Sometimes dialogue gets lost in flowery prose, and this is especially true, I think, with some of the older piece of literature, you know, stuff from like Victorian times where they were like writing paid by the page almost, it seems, because they write so dense and it takes so long for them to describe, and that's part of the charm of that time. But you know, sometimes I just want to know what the story's about, and the easiest way for me to do that is just to pick up on the dialogue. So Shakespeare is basically that. all dialogue. And if I just try to imagine in my mind what that would mean, it's not as bad. It's not as frustrating, because that's what actors and actresses look at. They don't get a book when they're, unless it's based on the book, but they don't get a book when they're practicing their lines. It's a script, and their script looks like what we're reading with Shakespeare, and so it's not bad. It just looks different because we're not used to what it looks like. But we have this today all the time. And so hopefully that's not as intimidating. But I really want to mention what the story is about. To me, it's about the silliness of love. And I think this is extremely relatable to people who are probably going to be assigned to read this, which is going to be either middle school or high school, maybe even college. I think even though Shakespeare seems irrelevant and not relatable to nowadays, the idea of love is something that, especially this targeted group, between middle school and high school and college, they're desperately interested in or searching for, maybe. And I feel like if A Midsummer Night's Dream was taught in that lens, if it was taught in that respect as to basically, well, why is this story important to my life? Well, this is about love and searching for love and the silliness of love. You know, it demonstrates what I think are three sort of stages where people can be in terms of a relationship. It can be where they're in a committed relationship, which would be sort of demonstrated through both the Duke and Duchess, as well as Oberon and Titania, who happen to be fighting, but I still think they're in a committed relationship, king and queen of the fairies. And then you have that element of people who are competing for a relationship or competing in a relationship, where there may be more than one person interested in a particular individual. So we see that through Lysander and Demetrius, where we see two men who want to be with the same person, and that I think is highly relatable in those school settings, where you may have these one or two or this group of boys or girls who are highly sought after, and everyone seems to be going after them. But it's how do you separate that? Who is sort of going to win in that sense? And of course, the last one is wanting to be in a relationship, but that person not really giving you any signs back. And we see that through Helena and Demetrius, where she is just totally being rejected. And then, of course, it flips, because now, or towards the end, when Lysander and Demetrius fall in love with her, now she's all of a sudden the most popular and most attractive person in the world. But just before, she wasn't like that, and she doesn't handle it very well. She thinks that they're just kind of messing around. And this, I think, is highly relatable, especially to people who maybe don't have a lot of people, you know, pursuing them in a relationship. But then later on, maybe they find themselves being highly pursued, and they wonder what's going on. It wasn't like that before. So I think that if this was taught in the context of that, the silliness of love, the pursuit of relationship, the different types of relationships there are, and the stages, they all kind of cram into this sort of story that is fun and silly, and it is sort of hidden behind this gate of Shakespeare. But it doesn't have to be as intimidating. It can still be relevant and relatable today. So those are just some of my thoughts on A Midsummer Night's Dream. I did enjoy it. I was surprised again that after all these years, I thought, Shakespeare, it's gonna be too difficult. I don't know how to read that anymore. I don't have a teacher right there answering all my questions. But with all the annotations, with all of the sort of, I think, flow of the story, it was very short, of course, 2 hours for me, but it wasn't as bad as I thought. And I just had to get in there and be patient, get through the first act. And once I got through the first act, I thought, oh, well, this isn't that bad. I understand what's going on. Again, I was highly intimidated by the names, but once I got past that, the language really wasn't that difficult. I could understand it. It was, some of it I didn't get, but for the most part, I could at least understand what they were talking about. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.